Hey guys, it's Baban. Oh, I think that might be a little bit redundant with this one. Hey guys, it's Baban, and there is no end to this. There is none. There is no reprieve. So we're starting off 2018 with something that's a little bit weird and a little bit different from what I'd usually do. I wanted to try and draw something that was a bit more interesting than the stuff you see a lot of people doing. And something that I think a lot of people would be maybe a bit too scared to do. I see a lot of boring expressions, so I wanted to do something that was a bit more fun in that regard. So here we go. I've got all my references in the background in a basic chart of all the planets because I wanted to figure out which ones were going to look best on all the different ones. Like on the bigger planets I've got more of a kind of face, whilst the little ones are a little bit more dainty. Now, this is the first sketch that I'm doing, and you can see I have a bit of trouble laying out where all the rings are, just to make sure that everything is on a flat plane, so that I can fit everything into the space that I've got, because I don't want it to be too zoomed out where you can't see all these nasty little details that I'm going to be putting in, because they are going to be the focus of it. So I'm just putting in quick little sketches of all the faces and what sort of angles they're going to be at and just the basic details so that I can go and redraw them later to have a more cleaned up sketch. But it's just making sure that everything is in the right sort of place, that the composition looks good and everything reads well and we can see all of the planets enough. And I wasn't too fond of the composition at first, so I go and move them around a little bit so that we've got a little bit more depth of field, where we've got this first planet overlapping with where the sun is. There's a couple in the background that like slightly overlap, which is also why I decided to keep these rings in to show the path of where the planets are, because otherwise it's going to look a little bit flat since it is focusing on the planets themselves and making those like as big as possible so that you can actually see the details on them. And that there's not going to be a lot of markers in terms of the spacey background to define where space is or how big the space is. It just gives a little bit of help to give you an idea of how big everything is and how far away everything is from where we're looking from. And now I'm cleaning up the sketches. These are going to be the ones that I use for putting over the top of my painting to make sure that everything's in the right place. I think I go and redo some of these little ones though, because this first go round isn't very good. I had to bring the references back in to make sure that they were as beautiful as possible. Now, I know a lot of people struggle with drawing expressions and not really wanting to put many wrinkles on, especially if you've got like a more simplified style or if it's anime or something. I don't tend to see people draw wrinkles a lot, and I think that's quite disappointing because you can do a lot of weird expressions with them and make them seem stronger and a lot more expressive. And obviously it depends on how simple you want to go with your style, and that's sort of a difficulty that I have. I'm not sure how prominent to make the wrinkles, how many to put, because if you do put too many then it sort of makes the person you're drawing look decrepit. Especially if you're drawing younger characters, that can be a bit of a problem, but trying to find that sweet spot where you can put a few wrinkles or figure out how to simplify them to get across the sort of emotion that you want is something that you should definitely study, because it goes a long way in getting emotions to express and read correctly. With this, I'm also trying to learn how to use references and sort of stylize them a little bit. So when I use references, I tend to stick too closely to exactly what they look like. I put too much faith in them and my stuff ends up looking a little bit boring. But I don't use references much for finished stuff because it's more me testing what I can do with the knowledge that I have. So it's mainly with study stuff that I have noticed that. But what I'm trying to do with this is kind of get a bit more used to that by actually using references for something that's going to be more finished and trying to actually make the things look like the reference, but also have them more stylized. It's more that I want them to be recognizable as these reference images, but also not look completely out of place in the illustration itself. So they've got their own sort of style separate from something that's more trying to copy the reference completely and make it look like more photorealistic, I suppose. Now, I was initially going to go in and line all this and make the lines really, really thin so that they weren't that noticeable, and then go and paint around it, but I thought that's going to make it a little bit too solid, and I want to be able to work around with this and make it really silly and cartoony looking. So I just went straight in and blocked all the shapes out and used these sketches that I'd just cleaned up as the bases for them for the painting that I'm going to do. And for the painting, I wanted it to look a little bit painty, but not too much. I sort of wanted it to look a little bit smoother and have all of the details look a little bit more painty. So I'm going in with the airbrush again because that's what I like, and I'm adding in textures and stuff with a different brush, and I'm just slopping down the colours at this point to make sure that they look okay, and I clean up the textures later. And adding in all the little details before I move on. And with the colour scheme, I wanted to keep it more towards oranges and purples, so everything goes sort of more towards those colours, and any colours in between are a bit more muted. So the darker colour that I've got is these purples and the blues, and the more brighter, more saturated colour that I'm using is this orangey colour. So any colours that come more towards the orange and yellows get more saturated, and any colour that goes more towards the blues gets a little bit more saturated towards that colour, but not as saturated as these oranges because I want the sun to be the thing that sticks out the most. And anything in between sort of fades out like a little bit because I don't want it to be as prominent so that these other two colours stick out more. And I'm starting to shade the sun with the airbrushes. And I think I go and add in some darker colours later because what I did was, I think I painted either the dark over the top or the light colour over the top, and then underneath I go and add in different colours so that it's got a little bit more difference in the shadows so that it's not all just one colour. And I didn't want to add too many colours into it because the sun is supposed to be the light source that's kicking out all the light onto everything else, so that's the colour that we're going to have reflected onto all these other planets, but we don't want too much going on with the sun. We want to keep it just to this sort of yellow, orange and reddish sort of colour. And I added in some gradients just to make it a little bit more interesting so that it doesn't look as flat with these flames and stuff, and I've stylised those quite a bit. If you guys have ever seen like universe posters that you get, like not the like posh streamlined looking ones, the ones that kids might have on their wall, that's the sort of theme I was going for, I think, especially like with the bright colours and stuff, and you know, stupid looking faces. And these are also usually the colours that you see on those sort of charts, so I wanted to have something that did look like that, but obviously is a little bit off because of how it's drawn. Now you can see that I've finished the sun up a little bit, so it's got a little bit more of a sharper look to it. It's not as brushy as with the airbrushes. I've gone and added in like some definition around the edges and wrinkles and stuff, and I've added the eyes in, some eyelashes, cleaned up the eyebrows and other wrinkles on top of the head a little bit. And the way I decided to do this was to make a layer over the top and just start painting on over the top by colour dropping any colour that I wanted and just painting that over the top of anything that I'd done so that it's not all on the same layer, so it's a lot easier to change things and just overpaint it. Because I still wanted a little bit of a painty look, and because I started using the airbrushes just to make it look a bit softer, I thought it was looking a bit too brushy, so I wanted to go in and just put a little bit of texture back on by adding in the sharper details. And this is also the technique that I'm going to use to clean up all the rest of them. So you can see I'm starting to clean up all the textures that I've got underneath to make sure that I've got a nice base for it to use. I'm trying to make sure that they work to the shapes of the drawing so that it doesn't look like I've just slapped a face on top of something that's round and they don't really work to the shape of the face. So you can see the stripes and stuff that are on Jupiter, they sort of work around the chin and everything and around the cheeks. And I've made sure to make all the textures on the ones that are closer to the front a little bit more gritty so that we can see them. And the ones towards the back don't need to be as gritty, but I've still made sure that there is a little bit going on so that it doesn't all look completely flat. And then what I think I do is go over everything in the same sort of style with an airbrush to block out the shapes of the face, make sure that the shadows and everything look nice and make sense. And then once that's done, I go over everything again on an overpaint layer, on a completely new layer, and just paint in all the little shadows and details and define the shapes a bit better, which is what we're starting to do now. And with some of them, I ended up painting on the highlights, like on these two at the front, because I already had this darker textures, all these darker textures underneath, so I painted on the highlights, and on other ones like the earth, I painted on the shadows because it's already quite light from all the light that I've put on that's hitting it from the sun. I also did all this sort of blocking out with the shapes with overlay and hardlight layers so that I don't lose all these textures that are underneath. I don't want to go over those too much. I still want them to be able to be seen in the shadows and underneath all the highlights. So by using those layer modes, it lets me just have these colours react to what's underneath them rather than completely blocking them out and having to like go and select each colour and paint them on for all the separate colours that are in the textures, like you would have to do if you're doing it traditionally. I also kept time for this one, which I've been trying to do a lot more lately with things that I draw, and this took around 17, I think it was between 17 and 20 hours, which is how long most of my like finished painted rendered stuff takes, because I don't seem to be able to spend much more than that on something before I get fed up of it. And I've been trying to sort of be able to spend more time on stuff, but it always seems to boil down to about that amount of time. And I think it might be down to the style. I don't do things like completely towards realism. It's always like a bit more simplified and cartoony, just because that's more my dig. Like the realistic stuff isn't the sort of thing that I'm into. But I'm thinking of maybe trying stuff more towards that end of the scale to see how long I can spend on it, how long it takes me, and see if that is what's making me only be able to spend maybe like 20 hours on something. And we're nearly done with shading all these faces. I think I just need to clean up the eyes and add those in, and then we start with the overpainting, making sure that everything has a little bit more sharpness to it so that it's not as washy and just blocky with all the shadows and stuff. This is a technique that I'm trying to use a lot more lately as well. I'll do my usual thing of blocking out the shape and then airbrushing all the base colours and everything, and then because I still want it to look a little bit paintier, I'm trying to go a bit more towards painting instead of just doing the one layer and trying to make everything like perfect the first time. With each bit of paint that I put down, I can, like I say, do this base and then the airbrushing, and then I can make this new layer over the top, and then I drop the colours and paint it over the top. So I'm basically devising a simpler way to get a sort of painted look that's also quite nice and soft where it needs to be, but so that I don't need to be going in and messing about with all that noodling and like overpainting it and keeping poking at it for ages to make sure that everything looks perfectly how I want it. Because going in and trying to get all these soft gradients with all the textures like underneath them and transferring from the shadows and carrying on into where all these highlights are, that's going to be something really annoying to do if you were to do it on one layer. So that's a bit of a benefit to working like this and like working digitally and with layers. What I can also do is go and add like crazy amounts of glow over the top of things to make it look like it's glowing from the inside. I can also go and add glow to like literally everything else to make it look really obnoxious and glowy and horrible. I think this also kind of ended up looking like a spray painted mural that you'd see on a wall somewhere. God knows where would want this on their wall, but that's what it sort of ended up looking like. Someone did say during the sketch that it sort of looked like that, so I think I might have gone a bit more towards trying to make it look like that. But I think that was a good way to go with it. And yeah, this is me just adding in all the little details, painting the eyes, making sure that they stand out enough, adding in eyelashes and stuff to make it look even more beautiful. And I added a little bit of shadow behind all the planets to make it seem like they're just casting a little bit of a shadow into space, so that all these highlights that are on the front of them have a little bit more contrast, so that all the values that are in the shadows of the back of the planets doesn't just merge into the space that's behind them, because they're probably going to be similar. So just adding this little bit of shadow behind them separates it a little bit and just redefines the silhouette of them. I also added like sort of cloudy looking nebula-y stuff into the background just to break it up a bit and not have it look completely flat. So I want it to look like it's got a bit of stuff going on in the background. I did go and add a bit more after to sort of show that it's part of the Milky Way, like we've got the band of the stars going across, just to show a little bit more depth of what's going on further out in space rather than just in this little confined space. And I didn't forget to add Pluto way in the background, looking all sad and dejected, and then a few little more nebulous clouds of stuff. And finally, just some little sparkles over the top of everything, because it's not done unless it's got a ton of sparkles over the top of it. The only thing I like about anime art is all the sparkles. Like I'll take that. Good shit. And we're done. I hope this helped. If it did, give us a like, share if you think it'll help someone else, and subscribe for new videos on Fridays. There's links down in the description to the Discord where you can buy prints of stuff that I've drawn, including this horrific thing. There's also a link to my commission information and where you can buy me art shit to help me out if you want. And lastly, here's a couple of links to videos where I talk about similar techniques to the ones that I've used in this and maybe elaborate on them a little bit more. Yeah, I hope this helped. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.